Hey everybody, this is Joe List. Welcome to Mindful Metal Jacket. So happy to be back. So happy that you are here. If you're watching on YouTube, I apologize for the reflection in the glasses. Here's no glasses. I went no glasses last week, and there was a lot of people like, whoa, what is this? Did you get LASIK? Why am I so attracted to you right now? So, well, I'm going no glasses. So if you're listening on audio and you'd like to see how goddamn sexy I am without these glasses, switch over to YouTube. And if you're listening to audio, YouTube, wherever you're listening, thank you for listening. We are on YouTube as a video podcast now. You can go over there, subscribe to my YouTube page. It's also the home of Joe and Ronan Talk Movies and some other little sketch videos and such that I've done. But however you're listening, I appreciate it. If you're listening on audio on iTunes, go leave a review, 5 stars. The reviews have been so nice. It's so kind. Really appreciate it. If you're on YouTube, leave a comment, a nice comment, lots of nice comments. I appreciate it. I mean, leave whatever comment you want, but the nice ones obviously are better. And I really appreciate the support for the show. We took a long break. I was not expecting such a wonderful reaction when we came back, particularly the Sam Morril episode, which is the most popular episode, as Sam is obviously a very popular comedian. I saw him last night, and we had a chat, and go check that one out if you haven't. I assume you have because it's been such a popular episode. But it really heartened me to hear the response from everybody with the podcast being back. So my endless gratitude to all of you for the kind words and for listening. I'm glad the show helps. It helps me as well. And today's a good one. It's a little bit of a shorter one, as you probably have seen, as everything has timing on it now. A little time, whatever you call that, at the bottom on podcast and video, which sometimes is a blessing and a curse, don't you think? Isn't it nice about going to the movie theater? You turn on the movie, or they turn on the movie, you turn on your wife, and the movie's on, and there's no ability to know how much is left. And so you don't know, and it allows for like false endings. I was just talking about this with The Dark Knight, which is a wonderful film, although I hate the last 20 minutes. Again, check out Joe and Ronan's Talk Movies for more movie talk. But you think there's an ending. You think the movie is ending like halfway through because you can't click on the cursor to see, oh, there's an hour left. Anyways, that was a tangent, but that's like life. Would you want to know how long life is? Of course, that's not possible because the future is unwritten, as we know, but sometimes forget. Anywho, all that to say, I'm glad you're here. And this is a bit of a shorter episode. My guest today, special guest, they're all special, aren't they? She only had a short period of time, but we got a lot in. I'm so worried about butchering her name. Emma Seppala, I think is how you say it. I don't actually know, and I feel terrible about it. I know her as Emma, and her last name, as you can see on there, Seppala, and there's little grammar marks above the A's, and I'm not smart enough to know what that is, but Seppala, I hope I'm not ruining her name. I'm so grateful that she came on. She is wonderful. I highly recommend following her on Instagram, The Happiness Track. She posts a lot of great stuff, a lot of valuable stuff. She wrote a book called The Happiness Track, which I admittedly have not had a chance to read. It's funny because I'm reading stuff off my phone now and I don't have my glasses on, and I realize I'm blinder than I realize. But she is science director of Stanford University's Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education, and the author of this book, The Happiness Track: How to Apply the Science of Happiness to Accelerate Your Success. She studies happiness, all these things. It's a really great episode. Like I said, she had an abbreviated time, but obviously a very busy woman, and I'm happy that she made the time for me. I'm pleasantly surprised always when these really smart people make the time. Not that comedians aren't really smart, but we all do each other's podcasts. We're all friends. So really happy she came on. We talk breathing exercises and anxiety and mindfulness, of course. And there's a lot of great wisdom in here. She's such a kind and thoughtful person. I recommend her book, even though I haven't read it. It's something I plan to read and will read. I'm just swimming in books over here. I'm like, I can see 10 right here. This is my trip to Berlin that I'm taking. And then I got Lenin, remembering an interview with Lenin, and he's a real asshole. This guy could have used some mindfulness. It's really mind-blowing. And then look at this, Scorsese by Roger Ebert, two of my favorite people ever. And there's a whole bunch of other books over here. But anywho, check out her book. I think you'll love it. I think I will love it when I eventually read it. And the happiness track on Instagram, there's just tons of great stuff on here, little daily quotes. There is nothing for you to take from this world. You have come here to give. I mean, how good is that? Think about this one's longer, but well, I guess we should just get to the quote. I mean, we have a quote here. Typically, I'm giving you extra quotes, but the point is, go check out the happiness track on Instagram and check out the book and enjoy this podcast. Like I said, it's brief. So I apologize for the shortness, or maybe you're welcome for the shortness. Again, everything's blessing, curse, it's all perspective, isn't it? Isn't all of life just perspective? Am I right about that, folks? I think I am. Look at that. If you're watching on YouTube, I just tried to scratch as though my glasses were here. That's why I made this face. Anyways, I am rambling. This is not what you came here for. You came here for a little strength and hope, perhaps, a little reminder of mindfulness. And you're going to get that from Emma. She's wonderful. Here is a quote recently from her, perhaps from the book. You are not a victim of your past. You are the director of your present and the dreamer of your future. All right. Thanks, everybody, for being here. I appreciate you. I love you. And enjoy this conversation with Emma Seppala. Thank you. Oh, fun. There's a little lady that tells you we're recording now. That's new. Thank you for being here, Emma. I appreciate it. I will have given you a proper intro so we can just jump in. I first heard you on Dan Harris's podcast, and I thought you were fantastic, and it really helped. And now I've just been following you on Instagram, and you post all these great, helpful things. That's become part of my mental health. So I appreciate it.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
I have to admit, I have not read your book yet because I'm reading like 4 books at once. So my wife will shoot me if I order another book, but eventually I'll get to it. But I appreciate you being here, and I love your stuff, and it's really helped me. So thank you.
I'm so glad.
Glad. One thing I wanted to, I guess we can just jump right in it because I know you have a limited time. One thing that was really interesting to me that you were talking about on Dan's podcast is about suppression and suppressing anger and sort of anxiety and how physically unhealthy that is. And then you kind of talked about how breathing exercises can really be helpful. I'm a big meditator. We talk about that all the time, but I had never heard all these benefits of the breathing. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how unhealthy suppressing sort of anger and emotions can be and how breathing can sort of help that.
Well, no one's ever taught us how to handle our emotions. And, all the people who are supposed to teach us, like our parents or our teachers, they don't know. No one knows what the hell is going on with regard to our emotions. Like, what are we supposed to do with them, especially the big, bad, negative ones? And so what does the research show is that suppression, which is the technique everybody uses because they don't know what else to use. And, as kids, they're taught to just suck it up, buttercup, like just suppress it because there's no other solution given. And this is across countries. I've seen this in audiences from all over the world. They all say, well, we're just supposed to sort of stuff them down and pretend they don't exist. And the result of that is that the emotion doesn't get resolved and it plays havoc on your body. So research shows that it actually, like for example, anger, if you suppress it, it actually becomes stronger in terms of your physiological impact. So heart rate, blood pressure, inflammation, everything. It's like a soda can that you're shaking up. And that's how it feels psychologically too, right? You suppress anger for a while, it's going to come out as passive aggression, or you're going to blow up sometime. I think we've all been there. It doesn't work.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because it's a hard thing to deal with. And I struggle sometimes of when to if you get upset with somebody, when to sort of say something and when not to, because suppression can, like you said, can lead up to just resentment, which is like physically unhealthy for
Right.
us. And then, like you said, eventually just kind of snapping, and it's, you snap at somebody because they you got your order wrong and you realize like, oh, that's not what you're talking about right now, something else has happened. But it's also hard to choose when to sort of address stuff because
Yeah.
you're afraid of hurting feelings or changing the dynamic of a hang or whatever it is. So it can be really hard to decide. Do you have thoughts or advice on that? Is there a specific time to address something in the moment, or sometimes, there's a saying that I love: "Say what you mean, but don't say it mean," where you kind of have to let time pass and settle down, so it's not in the moment. Because if you say things the wrong way, it can make things worse.
It depends how triggered you are. If you're at a 9 or 10, it's not a good time. You're going to be mean, probably. Or you're not going to
Right.
say things in the most skillful manner. So if it's a 9 or 10, then you can think of emotion as energy, or we call it action tendency in terms of psychology. It's energy, right? So go and use that up. If you're angry, go and like write it out in your journal. Go and take, walk around the block until you've settled down. Do something with that energy. Clean up your kitchen. Whatever it is to just sort of settle your energy. The other thing you can do is lie down. I mean, there's one study that showed that lying down when you're angry starts to cool all of that down. Starts to cool that fight or flight energy, which is triggered by anger. So first do that, because you're going to regain the ability to think clearly. Your brain is otherwise not thinking logically and reasonably because the emotion centers have hijacked your ability to think logically. So that is why we know when you're in the intensity of emotion, that's not when you want to be addressing a situation. If your
And
emotions less so to 3 or 4 or 5, and you think you can talk about it in a way that's not going to be mean, that's going to be able to listen to the other person and exchange in a reasonable way, and you feel like the other person is also not in a 9 or 10, then yeah, you can bring it up. Now,
Interesting. Yeah, it's always hard to like choose those battles. And I just had an instance when I was with family, which is always stressful and triggering to me because there's years, your entire life worth of emotional baggage, resentment, whatever it is. And and then I'm in therapy now, and I do a lot of mindfulness and meditation and recovery and all this stuff, and so family comes up, so you start to have these things present. You start becoming mindful of behaviors, so it's tricky not to say, "This is what you always did." You kind of have this thing, and I'm like this,
right.
and it really becomes an exercise of knowing when to do that, and then um, and sort of patience and understanding that. And I think it's something maybe we all need to work on and be mindful of. But mindfulness definitely helps with that. Are you familiar with Healing Back Pain, Dr. Sarno's book? That was the first book that I read that really talked about that. Is that his theory was that all pain that's not from like blunt trauma or like an injury is from suppressed anger, and that was sort of his big study. That I guess was controversial at one point. Does that sort of um, I don't know the word. I'm not as smart as I look. I have glasses, but does that make sense with your studies too? Is that possible that suppressing anger and resentment and anxiety can actually cause physical pain in the back or anywhere?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, any emotion will do that. Any emotion, and there's research on pain. I mean, there's physical pain, there's the psychological aspect, and if you can heal the psychological aspect, which we showed in one of our studies on loving kindness meditation, it actually reduces the physical pain. There's just so much. And I mean, there's a book that's been on the New York Times bestseller list for years now, um, called "The Body Keeps the Score," which goes into that. Trauma and so forth are in the body. But going back to your earlier point about family, some of your family members are never going to change. It's not going to happen, right? So what's the only option is that we have to change. And what it is that we've got these buttons, and they're pushing our buttons. And so our responsibility is, how do we get rid of those buttons? That's the only thing. I mean, I remember when I had completed my first 3 meditation retreats, I sort of did them in a row because when I realized how awesome they were, I just kept going. And then I visited family and other people who used to push my buttons. And I got there and I was like, oh my God, they're so different. What happened? And it's like, they're not different. I'm different. Some of
Right.
those buttons have dropped, So some techniques, I mean, I don't know, I found that some of the techniques that were practiced in those retreats must have helped with those buttons. Not that I'm, trigger proof at all, but certainly there was a big shift that I noticed in very familiar patterns that had repeatedly been triggering in the past.
Right. So that's an interesting thing I heard you talk about too, is that sometimes, well, first of all, I agree, and that's a practice. It took me a long time to realize is that I'm not able to change anybody, and I have to remind myself to kind of keep my side of the street clean, as we say. And you kind of have to, a lot of this comes from acceptance. You have to accept people's behavior and being mindful of, okay, I'm feeling this way because they behave that way. That's the way they behave. And then even being compassionate to they're behaving that way because of the way they were brought up, or that's their learned behavior or whatever. And that stuff really does help, I find, is being more compassionate, which I've heard you speak of as well.
Yeah, the
But
compassion helps. I would also probably recommend not even creating a story around like, I'm feeling this way because they did this. I would just stop at, I'm feeling this way, because it kind of disconnects us from the story around it as well. Just be like, I'm feeling this way. What can I do now?
right.
That's compassionate to yourself too, because it untangles you from stories, from events. And then even when you're feeling that way, going back, hey, what's the sensation in my body? Okay, I'm not gonna, it's like lessening the story, lessening the words. What are you feeling? Are you feeling anguish or anxiety? Forget about it. Who cares? What am I feeling? Oh, I'm feeling this thing in my abdomen. Okay, now I'm just going to feel that thing. Bringing it back to this. It's like you're delinking the thought from the sensation from the emotion. Go back to your breath. You breathe through it and you let the sensation pass. You're delinking everything. You're reprogramming your brain that way. You're freeing yourself.
Right. God, that's so helpful. Just hearing you, you have a calming presence, which I wanted to talk about also, is that dealing with other people. And I've heard you talk about it before, is that if somebody else is suppressing something, we feel it. The person they're around can kind of feel and respond to that energy. It kind of, you can feel yourself getting tense because you can feel their intensity. Is that right? Could you talk about that a
Yeah.
little bit?
So if I were suppressing anger right now and talking to you, your heart rate would increase and you wouldn't know why. You're not feeling comfortable. You're not feeling comfortable. So it would be, like those moments when you're around someone and you don't feel comfortable and you can't explain it to yourself or anyone else. You're just like, I just don't feel comfortable around that person. Chances are they're suppressing. We register inauthenticity as threat. Animals do that. Humans do that. When we're around inauthenticity, we register it as threat because we know there's like an untruth going on and we don't know what it means and we don't know if our life is at risk because of it. So that's why suppression doesn't work out long-term for relationships, because the more we suppress, also the more there's this feeling of inauthenticity going on. There's a lack of communication going on, and that starts to break down relationships. So inauthenticity doesn't work. It just doesn't work. And that's what suppression is, unfortunately, the only technique anyone's ever learned about how to handle their emotions. Which, earlier you were asking about breathing. I mean, I moved to New York 2 days before 9/11, and I witnessed a second plane crash from the, rooftop of my building. And after that, I had so much anxiety every morning at 8:30 that my body was visibly shaking. And I didn't know what to do about it. Like I went to Bikram yoga 5 times a week and I was trying to sweat it out. I'd go and like hang out with Tibetan Buddhist monks to try and like get inner peace, like by osmosis.
Right.
I did all sorts of things to try it, except medication. I just didn't want to go there because I was reading a lot of research in psychology and knowing that we don't really know how medications work and that the brain is malleable. And I was like, let me see, is there another way? Is there another way? And anyway, I ended up running into a breathing class that I hated. And I hated that I felt more at peace in it. I hated that I don't like this class, but I feel more at peace than I ever have in my entire life. And I kind of even feel blissed out, which was just a weird experience. And then I realized after that class, I started doing the daily breathing practice that they taught. It's called sky breath meditation. And I was determined that it wasn't going to work for me because I just, I don't know. That's just how I was. And it worked it worked so well. I'm still doing it 15 years later every single day, even on the days I gave birth. So there's something to breathing. And it's the reason I studied the effect of breathing, this particular technique, the sky breath meditation for veterans with trauma. I've studied it at Yale with undergraduates. There's something about breathing because it's not just having an impact psychologically, it's having an impact physiologically. And so I think that's why it has such an effective, beneficial impact on the nervous system, especially with regard to anxiety and sort of those kinds of negative states.
Yeah, it's amazing because that's such a interesting story of the 9/11 and watching that happen and the trauma, because I was at home watching on TV and it was traumatic. So I can't imagine what it was like for people that were physically here in New York watching it happen. But um, I've told this story before, probably on this podcast, but this is just sort of a side note about a psychological thing. And when I was a kid, I was terrified that somebody was behind the shower curtain. So anytime I went into the bathroom, I would open the shower curtain and check behind it. When I was ages like 4 through 13 or 14, just every time it was like a compulsion. I had to check behind the shower curtain. And eventually I stopped. I don't know why. I just sort of got over it, or I understood. And then I remember years later, the day of 9/11, I went in the bathroom and just subconsciously pulled the shower curtain back and looked back there. And I was like, that was like some kind of weird psychological thing that just made me revert back to this childhood fear. So I don't, you'd probably know more about that, the psychology behind that, but that's just a interesting anecdote about 9/11 and our responses to it. But um, what could you talk a little bit about sky breathing? Because I heard you talk about it before, and I did hot yoga, Bikram yoga for years, and I still do when I can. I haven't in a while because of the pandemic, and I do a lot of meditation and stuff, and I do this straw breathing, which is sort of exhaling as though breathing through a straw, where it's a longer exhale than inhale. Could you talk a little bit about
Mm.
sky breathing? Is that something you can explain, or do people have to kind of go find it on their own and study it?
Well, it's taught over, it's in a multi-day workshop. So it takes a few days to learn because it's a comprehensive series of breathing practices that sort of work together symbiotically. So I can't like teach it, in a few minutes, but it was started in India by Sri Ravi Shankar, who is, he heads a yoga tradition called Art of Living. And yeah, I would just think of it, I think of it as a sort of a comprehensive breathing practice that incorporates some of the traditional sort of yoga based practices like pranayama and so forth. And it has this practice called sky, which is like the Sudarshan Kriya yoga part, which is sort of a rhythmic breathing practice that's guided. So that's one of the reasons you'd probably want to take a class, because it's guided, and then you can learn it in that manner, and then you have a take home practice. So that's what I practice daily, and that's what we researched also.
Got you. Interesting. And
And it's
then,
offered, so it's offered through Art of Living, but it's also offered for veterans and military families at no cost through a nonprofit called Project Welcome Home Troops. It's offered high schools and middle schools through a nonprofit called Sky Schools. So lots of different, there's a prison program called Prison Smart, I think. I'm not sure. I can't remember, but yeah.
God, that's great. I mean, so is that what you would, if you were, president of the world and you had your say, what would we do? I understand there's not a president of the world. I don't want you to think I'm that stupid, but if you were running everything, what do you think the best thing we could do for young people to help with all this stuff? Would it be a combination of meditation, yoga, breathing exercises, understanding this stuff? Should we be teaching this in school? At what age? I mean, like, it feels like so many of all of our problems in this country and around the world is people just not understanding that thoughts are just thoughts, and sort of taking thoughts to be reality and getting in sort of this alternate reality, and having, like you said, no exercise or understanding of how to deal with emotions and feelings. I mean, all the way up to war and road rage, all these things. What would you say is, I mean, I'm sure that it's not a simple answer. What is the best thing that we could be doing more of? Is it teaching this stuff in school at a young age?
Yeah, I think so. My goal would be to have all kids. I mean, so many kids have trauma and then they become adults with trauma, which isn't necessarily a bad thing because adults who've had childhood traumas are often very resilient, very strong, and every trauma makes a person stronger. And yet, it also can make a person self-destruct or destroy others. So my goal would definitely be if all kids could learn a practice, like even just once, like doing sky breath meditation, something like that, that just sort of helps them overcome whatever trauma they've experienced so they can move on with their life and like show up in their life as having the ability to live up to their best potential, because every human being has creativity, every human being has potential, has skills, has values. There's such a gift to the world, and it's a question about what will make a person show up as their best selves, as their greatest potential in this lifetime. Or how many people have that, but they're drinking themselves to death, or they're sitting in their basement, never coming out, not achieving all of the beautiful things they could achieve. So that would be my goal for sure, is to have all kids go through something like that, which we know is really good for trauma. It's very efficient and quick. It's like our veteran study showed that in 1 week, they no longer had post-traumatic stress. They had been in counseling, they had taken drugs, they had done so many things. And boom, in a week, they were like, it was so helpful. Not to say that that would happen like that for every single person, but in our study, it was kind of surprising that 1 month and 1 year later, after the study was over, the veterans still showed normalized anxiety. Like they didn't have the symptoms of post-traumatic stress. I mean, it gives you hope, because not everyone can sit in therapy for years, or not everyone is willing to take drugs, they have side effects that make them feel dull in other ways of their life, other parts of their life. So there are some great options there. And yeah, I think meditation is a fabulous practice. And there are a lot of forms of meditation. I think here in the US, we just know about, one form of meditation or two forms. There's so many, I always feel like we need to share options with people so that they can find something that works for them.
It's amazing to me that we sort of have this onboard system that can work miraculously, essentially, through breathing or mindfulness. And you don't need, well, some people need, I don't want to dismiss the need for drugs in situations, but the fact that such a amazing tool is just in our onboard system with breathing, meditation, mindfulness is really incredible, because for so many, including myself, the answer is to go to some sort of substance, and that just doesn't work. Essentially, I mean, if you're abusing, again, I know that some people certainly that have mental disorders where drugs can work miracles as well. But to hear the value of breathing and breathing exercises is really almost like magical. I mean, it's like
Yeah.
really
I don't want to
tremendous.
say that a magic pill, but like Dan Harris says, 10% happier, like there is something we can do, that can help alleviate the symptoms of trauma, that can help alleviate our anxiety. And it's such a simple thing, it's such a simple thing. And like you said, it doesn't have side effects, it doesn't have addiction problems. It doesn't, yeah, it's just wonderful to know that these options are there. And I always just feel like, if people are suffering, just that they should have hope that there are options out there that will work for them and that will also be beneficial to their system, and will give them, the ability to come back to themselves.
Yeah, well, I think you're doing amazing work with this stuff, because it just, I can feel like the hope in your voice, and I appreciate it, and it does make me feel hopeful. I know you have limited time, but could you just touch upon also the other thing I love, because I'm a big hiker and big believer in nature. Could you talk a little bit about the science-based evidence of how beneficial nature and being in nature is to our psychologically, and I think even physically, physiologically in some ways? Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, research shows it decreases anxiety, depression. It increases your creativity by 50% just to be out in nature for 3 days unplugged. So many benefits. And if you can't make it out to, a national park, you can just go to your local city park. And if you can't go to your city park, even just hanging out with your local, street tree has an impact. And if you don't have that, then even just a plant on your desk. And if you don't have a window, even just having a poster of nature or a screensaver, all of those have been shown to be beneficial because we are so attuned to nature. And yet, 70% of kids who are underprivileged are nature deprived, and 70% of non-white kids are also nature deprived. So just thinking about what is going on, how are we raising our kids? What are we exposing them to? Are we setting people up for mental health? What can we do to bring more nature into people's lives?
Yeah, it's amazing because I mean that's something that just it becomes for me self-evident when I go out into a park, when I hike, which I love to do, and I've taken full hiking trips for a week at a time, flown to Wales and Peru and all these places, and you feel renewed. I mean, it's like the equivalent of hours and hours of meditation. Or like, again, when I was drinking and using, I'm like, I never felt as good as I did when I was out hiking or in amongst the trees in the woods, the ocean. For me, I mean, I always jokingly say the ocean just heals everything, just being in the ocean for a couple of minutes. So
Yeah,
I love hearing that, but I'm a person that really likes evidence and hearing somebody say it helps because I can feel that it helps, but in my mind, I'm always questioning myself because I hate
right.
myself. So it's nice to hear somebody who studied this stuff be like, no, it actually is good. There's plenty of studies. So that makes me feel great, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
of course.
um, well,
And by the way, on that topic of like self-love and stuff, it starts as a discipline. Yeah, it starts as a discipline, bringing things into your life and putting them on your calendar of what you'll do for yourself. I'm going to take that walk in the park today. I'm going to put on my calendar. I'm going to go to bed at 10 or whatever. I'm going to have a juice, first thing in the morning or whatever, self-care. Just start it as a discipline, because the more you bring it into your schedule, even as a discipline that you're just enforcing, you're going to start to feel better. And as you start to feel better, you're going to start to integrate and feel more of that self-love. So start with that discipline.
yeah, I mean, self-love and self-compassion is something that I've been working on and need to work on. I think we all need to work on. And the thing that helps me, that sort of mantra, is be as nice to yourself as you would be to somebody
Yeah.
else. I would never, if my wife said, "Boy, I haven't written it all today," I wouldn't say that's because you're a piece of shit and you're
Yeah.
lazy, which is what I'm saying to myself
Right.
constantly. So I have to remind myself of that. But
Yeah, please.
um, Emma, I don't want to take up any more of your time. I know you're busy. I'm really grateful that you came in to do this because it really has meant a lot to me. And just this conversation, I feel better. And I know it's going to help a lot of people. So thank you.
Welcome.
And I feel bad. Also, you said we'll have some laughs, and I feel like it wasn't funny at all. So I'll send you some links of my stand-up, and
Don't
it'll be
worry
much
about it.
funnier. it'll be way better than this. But I think this was really great. And I think a lot of people will get a lot out of it. So I appreciate it, and
Great.
please keep up the great work.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mindful Metal Jacket is hosted by comedian Joe List. Produced by Joe List. Edited by Matt Kleinschmidt. Executive producers Robert Kelly and Matt Kleinschmidt for the Laugh Button Podcasts.